About a week after my post, I planted a wall of blackberries and raspberries at the two sides of my garden facing the driveway. About 30 centimeters from the edge, so no overhanging branches. On the other side of the berry wall, I planted lots stuff like strawberries and tomatoes. To reach the tomatoes and strawberries from the driveway, you have either go through the fruit bushes or walk up to my house. Walk about 2 m along the side of the house and my windows, and then walk into my actual garden. Not something you do by mistake. For about 2 weeks it was somewhat quiet, but I still found the kids on my driveway every single days. As far as I know, they did not enter the garden, and I hadn't noticed them walking around my house anymore. So I figured the bushes were working. About 1 week ago, berry season started, and my bushes are now full of raspberries, and there's lots of strawberries as well. The neighbors noticed. First I caught the boys picking and eating raspberries, so I told them off and dropped them off at home, told their mom I caught them stealing. That's how I see it, even though it's fruit, and that I'd call the cops next time. She huffed and told me to grow up, but took the boys inside anyway. After that it was quiet up until yesterday afternoon, when I went out for a while and found the dad and his 2 sons right in the middle of my garden when I returned, clearing my bushes and plants. I didn't even confront them. Just called the cops from a distance as they hadn't noticed me yet, and started filming them after making the call. Luckily 2 cops showed up after 10 minutes or so, and they confronted the neighbor as they were still picking berries. They told them they were trespassing and that the berry picking was in fact considered stealing, and that I could press charges. For the first time I noticed a bit of fear in my neighbor. He was having trouble finding his words and kept looking back at his house. I guess hoping his wife would show to yell at the cops. They all went inside with the cops, so I just went home as well. After a while the cops came by and asked me if I wanted to press charges. I asked them if they felt like they scared the neighbor enough to stay away. I got a small smile and yes, about him, but the wife had just kept shouting at them and her husband about the little. Living next door. I told them no for now, asked them if I'd be allowed to get an extra camera set up on the wall between my garden and the road, to cover the entire front garden plus driveway. They said that's allowed as long as it's on my side of the wall. So, now I'm getting an extra camera installed. One neighbor knows I'm done messing around, but his wife isn't there yet, and if I ever catch any of them again, the cops will be called and possible charges will follow. In the past month, my older brother's fiancée left him. This meant he lost his house because the home they lived in was in her name. He lost his vehicle because what he was driving was her old car. He also lost his job because he was so focused on his breakup that he was constantly making mistakes. He moved in with our parents, who live about 5 minutes away from my husband and I. I do have a lot of sympathy for him. He literally has nothing, no home, no car, no job, no relationship. The problem is, this is 3rd time this has happened to him. That's right, he has had 3 fiancées leave him now, and every time he winds up losing everything. He has had 2 cars impounded because he gets so upset over his breakups he loses his job and can't make payments on his vehicles. My parents and I have bailed him out of these situations every time. I even paid off his back payments on his car, paid for his dog's vet bills, and paid some of his rent before. My parents and I have literally spent thousands of dollars trying to help him. Each of the past 2 times he winds up moving back in with my parents, who are in their late 60s. While we pay for everything for him, whenever he goes through a breakup he becomes a total jerk. He spends every weekend with his friends out camping or vacationing. How he pays for it I have no idea. After the 2nd fiancé, he took a trip to Fiji with his friends but couldn't afford to pay his rent. He mostly ignores me unless he needs money, which, during this breakup, I am refusing to help him out at all. The worst part is he treats my parents like garbage. If they ask him questions like, "Have you been looking for a job?" he will yell at them. He has no problem eating the food they provide for him and living in their house rent and utility free. And driving my mom's brand new car, which she got because he totaled her last car, but makes them absolutely miserable. My mom told me he will yell at them, call her stupid, trashes their house, sleeps all day, and leaves the care of his dog up to them. Every time I see my mom lately, it's obvious that she's been crying. The most recent event took place on Sunday. In an attempt to get him out of the house for a while, I offered to take him out in our boat. He seemed super excited about it, and when he's excited he can actually be a lot of fun to be around. He tells me he's hanging out with friends but will be back in town Sunday afternoon. Sunday afternoon rolls around and he's nowhere to be seen. I get a text around 6 p.m. that he's decided to go to a local tourist destination with all his friends. They are going to tube down a river. I'm bummed because I was honestly looking forward to it and because my brother has once again chosen his friends over his family. But it's whatever, I honestly don't rely on him for anything, so it's not that big of deal. But then I find out he's driving my mom's car and she has to be in her office early Monday morning. Then the peaceful protests in our town turn into full-on riots and my brother is still not home. At this point he can't get home because they've blocked off access to our town, so he just stays with his friends, and I wind up taking my mom to work. My dad tries to talk to my brother on Monday about how irresponsible he was, and my brother just yells at him, and then locks himself in my parents' basement for the rest of the day. My parents are miserable. They want to help and have always said they will do anything for us kids. But they are just enabling my brother every time they bail him out. My dad has major health problems that are being exacerbated by the stress my brother is causing. My mom has a history of severe depression that I see her slipping back into the longer my brother is with them. I'm really close to my parents and they are usually very fun people. The longer my brother stays with them, I am seeing them become depressed, short-tempered, and miserable. I tried telling them to kick him out, one of his friends would surely take him in. But they insist that they don't want to leave him homeless. I can't convince them to kick them out, but is there anything else I can say or do that might get my brother to get his head out his ass and get a job? How can I get my brother to see his behavior towards my parents is unacceptable? It just sucks. I used to really look up to my older brother because he is outgoing and funny and the sort of person everyone just gravitates towards. Now I'm just pissed at him for how he treats my parents and simultaneously scared for his mental health, because he clearly has a lot of problems. I am living with my family. It's me, a 15-year-old girl, my twin brothers who are 17, and my parents. My dad cusses a lot, and so do my older brothers. But apparently the standards are different for me. My dad overheard me saying a couple cuss words when I was on the phone with my friends, and he got mad at me for my language. And for how trashy and unladylike it was. This wasn't the first time he called me, and only me, out for bad language. But it was the one that frustrated me the most because I could tell there was a double standard. I thought of calling him out on his language and hypocrisy, but then I had a different idea. I said that, yeah, it was a bad habit I was forming and didn't want to make a pattern, because if I got in the habit of cussing a lot, that wouldn't make me come off well when I start getting jobs or going to college. And as I was growing up, I wanted to learn how to speak respectfully and intelligently. But it was hard to keep from bad habits when I heard him and my brothers having potty mouth syndrome so often. They're setting an example whether they realize it or not. So I wanted to work on things for myself, but also together as a family. I suggested we make a swear tax where if anyone swears in front of anyone else who's participating, they give $1 to each person who heard them. I'd want that rule for myself because it would keep me accountable, and I'd really like it if the family joined me for it. So my dad said he'd join, and so would my mom. They got my brothers to be a part of it too. They didn't really have a choice. My parents decided to make it a rule. I know it's kinda petty, but I wanted to make the point that my dad and brothers swear a lot and I almost never do. In the few months we've had the rule, I've gotten about $250 from hearing my dad and brothers cuss. And have not sworn once. It's kinda making my brothers angry because they often cuss when they're mad, and I ask them for money, so they get madder and cuss more. So I get more money until they shut up. My dad actually got mad at me too. He was having some drinks, calling his brother and talking. And I came over after and asked for $18. He actually said he wouldn't give me that much, and there should be a cutoff. He gave me $5, which sends a weird message. Like swearing is bad, unless you want to swear a lot, then it's cool. I did it because I know I swear the least out of my family, but I was the only one getting in trouble for it. 6 years ago my son Matthew had a daughter with his now ex-wife Josie. I have always thought of Josie as my own daughter, so when they divorced 7 years ago due to my son cheating, I was conflicted and disappointed. Josie wasn't particularly close with any of her family, so my husband and I naturally took them in. Josie was an angel. She had insisted that we didn't have to lift a finger more than before we had taken them in, and though she was hurt, she kept civil around Matthew. My husband and I held a huge hand in raising their daughter Ruth, because Matthew remarried less than a year later and now has a 4-year-old son after disowning Ruth. 2 years ago my husband was diagnosed with lung cancer. It was hard on everyone, especially Ruth. They were extremely close. She told him about her girlfriends and boyfriends before anyone else and has always wanted him to be the one to walk her down the aisle at her wedding. Matt rarely ever visited and didn't answer our calls, often saying that we had other kids, so it wasn't like my husband was dying lonely. Last night Matt stopped by to talk about inheritance. He never mentioned Josie nor Ruth and hinted that he thought he should get more inheritance than his siblings the entire time. My husband and I shared awkward looks until he decided to cut in. He explained that everyone would get a piece, but he'd focus more on Ruth and Bonnie, one of our other grandkids. Matt got angry and said that Ruth was just a bastard and that his son deserved more than her. My husband got furious after that and left the room saying that he wouldn't include Matthew at all. Matt yelled back and turned to me saying that Ruth wasn't worth it because she'd just grow up to be a whore like her mother. I told him that I'd rather have her mother as my daughter than him as my son and insisted that he leave. I'm getting phone calls from Matt's wife and family friends saying that my husband and I overreacted, and he was just angry that we were playing favorites. To clear some things up, Josie did not cheat on Matthew. Josie and Matthew met later in college and Josie was known as a party girl. Before that, Ruth isn't the product of an affair, but we are planning on getting a DNA test because what Matthew said has gotten under Ruth's skin. She was at the house when this occurred and overheard it. When it came to taking in Josie and Ruth, we didn't hesitate because Josie is not from here. She and Matt lived in another country until he moved them here a few months before he got caught cheating, and they had nowhere else to go as Josie was a stay-at-home mom. I had no intentions of choosing Josie over Matt, then and now, and I never discouraged Matt from visiting. I tried to make it very clear that we weren't picking and choosing when we took Josie in. We just wanted her and our granddaughter to be safe and have a good home.